All right, ready to geek out on the Wofi synthesizer. This thing looks seriously deep.
Oh, absolutely. It's so much more than just a synth or a sampler.
Yeah, the manual calls it a real-time streaming instrument. I'm really curious to see what that actually means in practice.
Well, it's all about manipulating one sample at a time, but with a ton of real-time control and processing.
We're going to really dig into the user manual today, by the way, version 1.0.3, just so everyone knows where we're getting all this juicy info.
Definitely. Firmware version 1.0.1 for those keeping track at home.
And they pack a lot into this little box, huh?
Yeah, it's amazing what they've managed to squeeze in.
So, first impressions. What jumps out at you?
Honestly, it's the real-time aspect. Everything you do, you hear instantly. No waiting for samples to load, no lag. It feels so immediate and responsive.
I'm loving that 25-key velocity-sensitive keyboard, too, with aftertouch. That's a big plus for expressiveness.
Definitely. It's not just about triggering notes. It's about shaping the sound with how you play.
And up to 10 voice polyphony, too. Enough to get some nice, lush sounds going.
Though, of course, that can change depending on how much processing you're doing. Complex patches might use up more voices.
Makes sense. So we've got a nice keyboard, a decent amount of voices. What about the sounds themselves? Where do they come from?
This is where things get really interesting. Instead of layering tons of samples, like in a traditional sampler, the Wofi focuses on deep diving into one sample at a time.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So it's not about having a huge library of sounds, but really sculpting and transforming a single sound into something new.
Exactly. It's like taking a raw ingredient and turning it into a gourmet meal with all sorts of techniques and spices.
I like that analogy. So how do we get these raw ingredients, these samples, into the Wofi?
A few ways. You've got 100 millibyte of internal memory, which is about 18 minutes of audio.
Not bad for a hardware synth.
And if you need more, there are these cool 100 millibyte cartridges you can pop in. Plus, you can use the mywo.fi cloud platform.
Oh, right. I read about that. Cloud storage and sharing.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. You can also access a library of sounds there.
Cool. So we can load samples from different sources, but
Yeah.
can we also record directly into the Wofi?
Absolutely. It's got a built-in recorder with gain control, so you can get a nice clean signal.
And I love that you can assign the root node as you record. Makes it so much easier to work with the sample later on.
Yeah, it's super handy.
Okay, so let's say we've got our sample loaded. What kind of tools do we have for shaping it, for really getting into the nitty-gritty?
Well, even before you hit the effects, you can edit the waveform directly, trim the start and end points, zoom in, set cue points.
Really get in there and fine-tune the raw material. Nice.
Then for playback, you've got 4 main modes: loop, one shot, reverse, and what they call boomerang.
Boomerang, what's that all about?
It plays the sample forward, then backward, and loops that whole thing.
Oh, so you get this back and forth motion? That sounds cool.
Yeah, it can create some really interesting rhythmic and textural effects.
So we can loop, trigger, reverse. What about pitch and time stretching? Essential stuff for a sampler.
Of course. The Wofi has dedicated controls for both, and they're real-time, so you can just grab a knob and hear the change instantly.
That real-time aspect seems to be a recurring theme here.
It really is at the heart of the Wofi's design.
I'm digging it. Makes it feel more like an instrument, less like a computer.
Exactly. It's about being in the moment, playing with sound, and reacting to what you hear.
Okay, so we can mangle our samples with time stretching, pitch shifting, all that good stuff. What about adding some controlled chaos, like glitches and stutters and stuff?
They've got you covered there, too. There's a glitch control that can introduce all sorts of sonic mayhem.
Love it. So we can get all glitchy and experimental if we want to.
Absolutely. You can dial in subtle variations or go full-on sonic destruction. It's up to you.
But what about really shaping the tone of the sound? Making it warm and fuzzy or cold and metallic, that kind of stuff.
Ah, you're talking about the machine selection now. This is where the Wofi really shines. It can emulate different sound engines, changing its bit depth and sample rate to give you those classic lo-fi vibes.
Wait, so it's like having a collection of vintage samplers built in.
Precisely. You can go for that clean, modern sound, or dial in that crunchy, gritty, lo-fi goodness. It's like sonic time travel.
I'm already hearing the possibilities in my head.
You've got options like clean sound, rack sampler, desktop sampler, and a bunch of lo-fi styles.
Wow, so we can really explore a wide range of sonic textures. This is awesome. What about shaping the sound over time, though? Envelopes, filters, that kind of stuff.
Of course. The Wofi has a classic ADSR envelope, which you can apply to the amplitude, the filter, or both.
I see we've got dedicated sliders for the ADSR. Always nice to have that hands-on control.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. Although, just a heads up, those sliders might not match the saved values when you change patches. You might need to wiggle them a bit to catch up.
Quirks of having analog controls in a digital world. Yeah. Okay, so we can control how the sound evolves with the envelope. What about the filter?
The Wofi has a resonant state variable filter with switchable 12 eboctave and 24 boctave slopes.
So we can go for smooth and mellow or sharp and resonant, depending on what we're going for.
Exactly. And you've got controls for cutoff, resonance, and how much the envelope affects the filter.
So we can get really creative with sculpting the tone. This is sounding more and more like a sound designer's dream machine. But there's one thing we haven't talked about yet.
What's that?
Granular synthesis. You mentioned it earlier, and I'm dying to know how the Wofi implements it.
Yes, granular synthesis. That's where things get really wild. Imagine taking a sound and breaking it down into thousands of tiny pieces, like grains of sand.
Okay, I'm picturing it. What then?
Then you can rearrange those grains, change their speed, pitch, and density to create these incredibly rich and evolving textures. It's like sonic alchemy.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So the Wofi lets you do all of this.
It does. It has a dedicated texture section that gives you control over all these parameters. You can add subtle shimmer or completely transform a sound into something otherworldly. It's really up to you.
This is blowing my mind. So we've got this deep sample manipulation, real-time processing, and now granular synthesis. It's like a sound design powerhouse. What else have they packed into this thing?
Don't forget about the LFO.
Oh, yeah, the low-frequency oscillator. We were just talking about all the ways we can mangle our sounds, but we need some way to add movement and pulsation to them. Right?
Exactly. And the Wofi's LFO is seriously flexible. You can use it to modulate practically any parameter on the synth.
Really? Any parameter? That's crazy.
Pretty much. Want to wobble the filter cutoff, make the panning swing back and forth? It can do it all.
Wow. So it's not just your typical LFO for vibrato and tremolo. We can really get creative with how we use it.
Absolutely. And it all happens in real time, of course.
Gotta love that real-time control. So how do we control the LFO itself? What kind of parameters do we have?
Well, you've got the standard rate and intensity controls. So you can adjust how fast it oscillates and how much it affects the target parameter.
Makes sense. What about waveforms?
You can choose from triangle, square, and sawtooth. Each one gives you a different kind of modulation curve, so you can really dial in the feel you're going for.
Okay, so we can create subtle wobbles or dramatic sweeps. Cool. So we've got all this amazing sound shaping potential, but how do we actually turn all of this into music?
That's where the sequencer comes in. And the Wofi sequencer is a real gem.
I'm ready to be impressed. What's so special about it?
It's a 16-step sequencer, but it can do so much more than just trigger notes.
Oh. Do tell.
It can also sequence parameter changes.
Hold on, so we can automate all those real-time tweaks we've been talking about, the filter sweeps, the glitch effects, everything.
You got it. It's like having two tracks working together, one for your notes and one for your parameter automations.
So we could have a bass line that gets progressively more distorted with each repetition, or a melody that slowly melts into this granular soundscape.
Exactly. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
And it's all happening in real time.
Right.
We can tweak things on the fly as the sequence is playing.
Absolutely. You can edit notes, change parameter values, anything you want. It's super interactive.
This is amazing. Okay, walk me through the sequencer controls. What do we have to work with?
Well, you've got your standard transport controls, start, stop, and tap tempo.
Okay, that's pretty typical.
Yeah.
Anything unique about the Wofi sequencer?
A few things. First, you can choose between a piano roll view or a classic step sequencer view. So you can pick whichever one works best for you.
Nice. Options are always good. What else?
You can actually play notes on the keyboard while the sequencer is running. So you can add fills, improvise over your loops, just jam along. It's really flexible.
I love that. It really encourages you to play and experiment, not just program static sequences. Anything else? I feel like there's more.
There is. Remember how we were talking about how much the Wofi emphasizes real-time control? Well, they take that to another level with something called compose mode.
Compose mode. Intriguing. Lay it on me.
In compose mode, the sequencer pads transform into this dynamic performance grid. Each pad can be assigned to a specific parameter, so you're not just triggering steps, you're actively shaping the sequence as it plays.
So instead of just placing notes, I could have pads that control velocity, note selection, maybe even some custom functions.
Exactly. It's like having a mini performance instrument built right into the sequencer.
This is incredible. I can already see this leading to some really wild and expressive sequences.
It definitely opens up a whole new world of possibilities. And that's not all. See that touch strip right below the screen?
Yeah, what's the deal with that?
That, my friend, is a mini touch-sensitive slider that you can assign to control any parameter on the Wofi.
Seriously? So I could use it to sweep the filter cutoff, modulate the LFO, even control that glitch amount we were talking about, all with my finger.
Yep. It's all about adding another layer of expressive real-time control.
I'm starting to think this Wofi has more control options than a spaceship. But wait, we haven't even talked about the keyboard itself.
Right. And it's not just for playing notes. You can customize how it interacts with the Wofi.
Oh, like what?
Well, for example, you can use velocity to control filter cutoff instead of volume, or use aftertouch to modulate the LFO.
So we can really tailor it to our own playing style and preferences.
That's the beauty of it. It's incredibly adaptable.
Okay, I think my head is about to explode with all these features. We're not done yet, right? There's more to explore.
Oh yeah, we've only just scratched the surface. We haven't even touched on all the deeper settings, connectivity options, and the MyWo.fi platform.
Okay, I'm ready to go deeper. Let's dive into those settings and see what other secrets this thing holds. All right, let's talk about those deeper settings and all that connectivity stuff. It sounds like there's a whole other level of customization waiting for us.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to explore.
So how do we access all these hidden options? Is it like some secret menu you have to unlock with a cheat code?
Not quite that exciting. It's all organized into dedicated settings menus. Each one focuses on a specific area of the Wofi, so it's pretty easy to navigate.
Like categories.
Yeah, exactly. You've got general settings, device settings, MIDI settings, CV settings, basically a virtual control panel for the entire instrument.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. What kind of things can we actually change in these menus?
Well, in general settings, you can adjust things like the display brightness, the fade timeout, even restore the factory defaults if you need to start fresh.
Good to know. What about stuff like controlling how the Wofi's hardware behaves?
That's in the device settings menu. Things like whether to ignore external root notes or transpose incoming MIDI notes. You can even fine-tune how the aftertouch affects different parameters.
This is where it starts to get really geeky, huh?
Oh yeah, it can get pretty deep. And if you love MIDI, the MIDI settings menu is going to be your best friend.
I'm all ears. What kind of MIDI magic can we do?
Pretty much anything you can think of. You can control local control behavior, channel routing, filtering, how the sequencer interacts with incoming MIDI data. Whether you're keeping it simple or building a complex MIDI setup, the Wofi can handle it.
This is making my inner synth nerd very happy. What about CV, though? You mentioned CV connectivity earlier. Does it have a dedicated settings menu, too?
It does. The CV settings menu is where you'll find all the controls for routing CV and gate signals, perfect for connecting to modular synths or any other gear that speaks the language of CV.
I'm not super familiar with CV myself, but it sounds like it opens up a lot of creative possibilities for interfacing with other gear.
Oh yeah, it's a whole other world. You can assign different modulation sources to the CV outputs, set the input channels, even route gate signals for triggering external events.
The Wofi is like a chameleon, blends in with any setup. But we haven't even talked about the wireless features. What about that built-in Wi-Fi and the MyWo.fi platform?
Yes, the MyWo.fi platform. It's like a whole online ecosystem for the Wofi.
Fill me in. What can we do with it?
Well, you can store and manage your patches and samples in the cloud, share them with other users, even access a library of sounds.
So it's like a social network for Wofi users.
Yeah, kind of. It makes it really easy to back up your work, find new sounds, and connect with other Wofi enthusiasts.
That's awesome. I always felt like cloud integration is a game changer for music gear.
Totally. And they designed it so the Wi-Fi stuff is handled by a dedicated chip, so it doesn't affect the instrument's performance at all.
Smart thinking. Speaking of performance, how does the Wofi handle memory management? We've talked about all these features and samples. Hey, there's got to be a limit somewhere, right?
There is, but they've got a pretty clever system. It uses a block-based memory allocation scheme, and it turns out that some sample lengths are more efficient than others.
Wait, what? Optimal sample lengths?
Yeah, the manual recommends sticking to lengths like 1.3 seconds, 2.7 seconds, 4 seconds, and so on.
That is a little quirky.
Yeah.
But I guess it makes sense if it helps maximize the storage space.
Exactly. It's all about making the most of those precious megabytes.
All right, before we wrap up, is there anything else tucked away in those settings menus that we should know about?
There's an info submenu where you can find all sorts of nerdy technical details about your Wofi. Serial number, firmware version, MSC address, remaining memory. It's all in there.
Cool. I always like knowing what's going on under the hood. Anything else? Any hidden Easter eggs we should know about?
Don't forget about the keyboard shortcuts. They can really speed up your workflow once you learn a few of them.
Oh, right. Shortcuts. Always helpful. Okay, I think we've pretty much explored every corner of the Wofi synthesizer. Final thoughts? What's the verdict on this beast?
I'm genuinely impressed. It's clearly a powerful and versatile instrument, but what really stands out to me is how well it balances that depth with user-friendliness. It never feels intimidating.
I totally agree. It's a real musician's instrument. It invites you to experiment, have fun with sound, and just get lost in the creative process.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the Wofi synthesizer. We hope you enjoyed exploring all the intricate details of this amazing instrument with us. Until next time, keep creating, keep experimenting, and keep the music flowing.